of wine talk is really to combine wine knowledge with an element of language learning. So I've called it a note of Mandarin in my wine. So over the course of these series, I'd like to talk about wine, but also throwing elements of Mandarin and English. And the idea is that if you are just a wine lover, you might want to enhance your ability to talk about wine with your Chinese friends or your English friends. So whatever your interest, I hope you will find something of interest in this series. And even if you are a wine expert already, I think this multilingual dimension can offer some new perspectives in things that you might already know. And most of all, I hope it's insightful and also fun, you know. So, and this first session today is very much a pilot session, and I hope you will give me some feedback as well in terms of, you know, the format or the topics you're interested in, whether you want to hear more in English or Chinese or both. And any comments whatsoever, please do let me know. So the setup for me of the talk, the first 5 sessions, I'm hoping to dedicate them to general knowledge. The idea is that, so if you're a novice to the world of wine, after these 5 sessions, I hope you will feel confident and well-equipped to choose and to evaluate wine and to discuss wine with your friends or even with experts, and you can ask informed questions about wine. And after the 5 sessions, I want to then move on to things which are a bit more detailed in terms of exploring wine regions and wine grape varieties. And just to be different, I'm going to start with China, you know, rather than France or Italy, because I'm sure everyone here, you're all very curious to find out what's going on in China in terms of wine production and the wine market. And for me, I personally really think that China is the most exciting wine region in our lifetime. You know, it's the new emerging wine region that we should all get excited about. So China is producing some fine wines, and I'm hoping by the time that we reach session 7 onwards, we can even form a wine club where we can offer or suggest some wines for you to taste at the same time as listening to these evening sessions. So it's not like a dry session. So I hope, you know, of course, you can drink whatever you like, but being a Sunday evening, so I'm hoping that you all choose a wine to drink a little bit at home with me while you're listening. So the first few sessions, it doesn't really matter what you drink. Anyway, so that's the plan. I do have a WeChat group, and you know, you're all very welcome to scan it and join. And the WeChat group, I think we can have more discussions around the topics after the talk. So in terms of what I would like to first talk about, being a bilingual series, I want to start with a very basic question, which is, what do we understand by the term wine? How would you translate the word wine into Chinese or vice versa? And I want to tell you a little bit about why I think this is worth discussing. So if we look up the dictionary definition of what wine is, here I've got the Cambridge and Oxford online entries that defines wine. So both of them said, okay, wine is an alcoholic drink made from the juice of grapes. So the Oxford entry very specifically say the primary definition of wine is fermented grape juice. And then the secondary meaning is that it could potentially be also made from other plants or fruits. And the Cambridge similarly says, well, you know, it's usually made from grape, but sometimes you can find wines made from other types of plants as well. And in the legal sense of the word, especially in Europe, the word wine is even more strictly defined. So here, you know, the European Community Trade Agreement, they would say wine means the solely the beverage resulting from full or partial fermentation from the grape, from fresh grapes of the Vitis vinifera European vine variety. So this is a very specific definition. Now I would like to say, okay, so what's the most natural translation of wine into Chinese? And I think we all agree it's 酒, right? It's the word 酒. And now if we look at the Chinese dictionary of the definition of 酒 from Xinhua Dictionary, Xinhua 字典. So here it says 酒 is made from sorghum, rice, wheat, or grapes, etc., fermented juice, fermented alcoholic drink. And it gives some examples such as 白酒, which is a spirit, a liquor, or 啤酒, which is beer, or 料酒, aromatic or cooking wine, or cocktail, or 茅台, which is a very specific brand of wine, of alcohol, of spirits, or 酒浆, which is a generic base wine. So here you can already see the Chinese definition of 酒 is much wider than the English counterpart. And so this is quite interesting, but you might also say, well, then, you know, maybe we should translate 酒 into alcohol rather than wine. And you'd be right, but I think what's lacking there is that the word alcohol or 酒精, you know, it kind of lacks this association with artisanship, with culture. You know, it just doesn't sound as emotive, you know, because we might say the hand sanitizer that we're using or the disinfectant has 酒精 or has alcohol in it, but it certainly doesn't have wine in it, right? So on that level, I think 酒 and wine are much more closely linked, you know, in the sense that we assign a lot of emotion, a lot of value into these words. So this leads to rather fascinating aspects that plays out between the two languages. So for Chinese people, I think the concept of wine is very wide-ranging. And as Chinese speakers, we take it as a given. If we put aside the Western influence in recent times of promoting the grape, you know, and just consider China's own history of winemaking, there is no reason to think that the grape is necessarily superior. Of course, the grape wine has always been very highly prized since the Han Dynasty, when the Silk Road brought in Western style wine into China. And it's always been well loved and very rare and expensive, but ultimately the grape is just one out of many types of ingredients used for wine. And if we think about what's really important to winemaking in China, it's the ingredients, it's the seasonality of the ingredients, it's the health benefits, and it's, you know, in terms of which season do we require certain ingredients to enhance our well-being. So for example, we've got osmanthus wine, 桂花酒, or chrysanthemum wine, 菊花酒, and they are the best for that season, right? Whereas in Europe, the grape is the wine throughout the season. What's more important is the vintage, is the variation between the years. So here the grape as an ingredient in Europe is certainly the supreme variety. Although you have cider, which is apple wine, 苹果酒, or mead, which is honey wine, 蜂蜜酒, or beer in Chinese we call 啤酒, or spirits like gin, 金酒, or 杜松子酒, juniper wine. So the fact that in Chinese we just say blah, blah, wine, whereas they are called by different names in English. Again, you can already tell that they're not really being considered in the same category. So why is this actually interesting? And the reason is because I have sometimes observed that in the European market, when a new category of alcoholic drink is introduced, you know, and this even applies to whiskey and to gin, you know, before it became very popular. What happens is the merchants tend to need to spend a lot of effort first to compare it to wine, you know, to grape wine. in order to sort of justify why this new drink is worth your time to get to know. For example, there is a cider is wine association, basically trying to tell people that cider is good stuff, like wine. I've heard on many occasions that when a new category of drinks is introduced, people will say things like, oh, this certainly deserves to be taken seriously like wine. You should consider this like a wine. And as a Chinese speaker for a long time, I found this rather odd. I feel like, why do they need this benchmark against the grape, all the time? Because I think in the Chinese consumer psyche, there is less of that inbuilt boundary in terms of what should be called wine. And on the flip side of that, there isn't that automatic and historic supremacy assigned to the grape either. So when you're selling wine or cider or mead or whatever to the Chinese consumer, the judgment call, for the Chinese consumer is not necessarily benchmarked against anything in particular, not necessarily even rice wine. The Chinese consumer very much care about the taste, the health benefits in its own right. Or maybe if the brand is prestigious, if it's a good brand to give as a gift, etc. But all that, is quite independent of the fact that, you have one predominant grape benchmark, for example. So this is quite fascinating to me because sometimes I think when you consider things from the perspective of different languages and how that might shape our understanding or even our philosophy of looking at the world, sometimes the language component can reveal very interesting and subtle insights to us. And that is also another reason why I wanted this series to be bilingual. So apart from exploring the wine aspects, we can also talk about culture, the linkage between culture or the differences between culture. And sometimes it could be obvious, sometimes it's very inspiring, and sometimes it's surprising, and sometimes it's very subtle. So if we're going to use 酒 as the term for wine, then we should clarify that we are now talking about 葡萄酒. 葡萄酒, 葡萄 is grape. So 葡萄酒 is Chinese word for wine, grape wine. But here we have a slight, again, a small complication. You may know that in China, the grape wine market, the predominant color is red, right? So China, 90% of wine consumption in China is red wine. 90%, that was 10 years ago, now it's about 80%. So as a result, many people in China thinks that grape wine should be red, So the term red wine, which is 红酒, 红 being the color red, 红酒 is sometimes used generally to talk about grape wine as a category. So this could be slightly confusing. So I personally would use 红酒 to mean 红葡萄酒, which is red grape wine, 红葡萄酒. But you should also be aware that sometimes people will talk about 红酒 to mean grape wine of any color, right? So slightly confusing, but that's another little thing to note. Okay, so this is all just a bit of a prelude about what I find interesting. Now let's actually go to our main session today called Opening a Bottle of Wine. Today I want to look at very practical aspects of serving wine. And the first step towards serving wine is, of course, to open the bottle. And so the first thing you would encounter is the closure, is the 瓶塞, the closure of the wine bottle, right? You should never underestimate how big this subject actually is. People always have very heated debates, whether it's wine professionals or wine lovers, they have very strong opinions about what is a suitable closure for a bottle of wine, and you will soon see why. So here's what you really need to know about closures. The most traditional and the most widely used bottle closure is the natural cork. So natural cork 天然软木塞. Natural cork is made from the bark of the cork oak tree, which is called 栓皮栎 in Chinese. It's an evergreen. The variety found used in cork is actually the European variety, mostly grown in Portugal and Spain and other Mediterranean countries. So being a natural and traditional option, a lot of people love the ceremony and the magic of pulling out the cork and the sound. You know, a lot of people insist that is part of the ritual and part of the enjoyment and the pleasure of drinking wine. And also there's a long-held notion that the natural cork plays a role in helping the wine to age well, because the natural cork is porous. So the tiny pores will let in a tiny bit of oxygen into the bottle. And that bottle, the wine in the bottle and the oxygen over time will interact and make the wine age over time, right? But of course, the only great wines, very good wines, are worth laying down for aging. So there is this simplified notion that if a wine has a cork in it, then it's a good quality wine because it's worth aging. So it's a very simplified narrative, and people in marketing have definitely caught on to that. So a lot of wines are being sold with a cork purely to give this sense of quality and prestige. But cork is, you know, in its own right, it is a good sustainable option. The cork tree, you know, is not cut down. You don't cut down the cork tree to make the cork. You just peel back the bark to extract the cork, and the tree will over 9 years or so heal itself, so it can produce more cork over time. So cork trees are fairly sustainable. You know, there are loads of cork forests being well preserved to produce corks. So it's environmentally sustainable, and cork itself, being completely natural, is also biodegradable and easy to recycle. So there are very good things going for the cork. But unfortunately, the cork has one major drawback, and that is called cork taint. Cork taint, it's an unpleasant smell. So in Chinese, it's just literally called 木塞味, 味 as in a smell. Cork taint can occur very naturally when chlorine in the environment reacts with certain natural molecules in the cork. So it's not necessarily to do with careless production or something going wrong in the storage or facilities, etc. Although it can be, but it's not necessarily so. It could happen quite randomly. You know, it's almost like c'est la vie, that's life. You know, it just happens to about 3% of the wine with the natural cork closure. It just happens. A percentage of them will be tainted with this TCA, what we call TCA trichloroanisole. And that's a huge problem for the wine, because at best, you know, very lightly corked wine, it will taste a bit lifeless. You know, you won't detect too much freshness or fruit. It'll just be a bit disappointing. But the severe cases, the wines will actually smell strongly of unpleasant things like wet, soggy cardboard or mold or musty things. And the wine will be undrinkable, and that will be a huge, huge shame. And around 3% of wine with natural corks will suffer from this problem. So, but just one point of clarification, I'm sure you've all heard of the term corked wine. It doesn't mean, you know, when you open in the bottle, bits of cork might have fallen into your wine, you know, that's not really the problem. And also corked wine, although it's unpleasant, it could be unpleasant, but it's not bad for your health or anything. It's not going to make you sick. So it's purely just a fault, a wine fault, that will make your wine either not very enjoyable or undrinkable. So it's worth knowing this in order to detect them. And you'll definitely impress your friends if you can spot a corked wine, and B, say, 三氯苯甲醚, which is trichloroanisole in Chinese. But I think TCA would suffice. Everybody would understand TCA. So TCA is the cork taint that you might come across from time to time. So what's the solution to this? Well, the most obvious solution is that let's just not use a cork. Let's use a different closure, such as the screw cap. So in recent times, the screw cap have really taken off to become a very popular option as well. The only thing is some traditionalists, they don't like the screw cap because they think it makes the wine look cheap. And also there is this notion that screw cap wine cannot be aged properly. But this is actually not really true anymore. You can actually make screw caps that allow certain amount of air permeability. And you can even argue that the amount of air that's allowed into the wine can be predictable. You can design it because the screw cap is a man-made product. You can design how much air can permeate into the bottle. Whereas a natural cork, this is a much more unpredictable and serendipitous type of process. So as far as 21st century technology goes, the ageability argument really doesn't hold up anymore for the natural cork versus screw cap argument. It's more a style thing, and also, again, going back to marketing, certain markets will consider the cork more premium. For example, China. China is still very much a cork market. Consumers will automatically think a bottle with a cork is more premium than a bottle with a screw cap. But that's not necessarily the case for Scandinavian countries, Australia, New Zealand, that's sort of new world areas. Whereas in China and also in France, Italy, these old world areas, cork is still much more preferred. And actually, there are lots more options these days in the market. You have technical corks, synthetic corks, corks made out of shavings of natural cork and sealed by a sealant, or plastic synthetic ones, or even glass, all sorts of material that can be made into closure that will make the process of wine opening much simpler, and also a lot of them you can reseal very easily as well. So the point is that we should be aware of the options out there, and perhaps not just to make these very simple associations that a cork is definitely better. In fact, this Ardia seal that you see on the top right-hand corner here, some of the most premium wines are experimenting with this seal. So currently the world's most expensive wine is sealed with this Ardia seal because it promises to allow constant oxygen transfer. It obviously avoids cork taint. You don't want to buy the most expensive wine in the world and open it, it's corked, right? So definitely keep an eye out next time you open a bottle of wine and see if you can tell what type of closure it is. It could look like a cork, but it's actually made of shavings, or it's synthetic, it's rubber. And the other thing I wanted to just mention is that also, apart from knowing what closure your wine is using, we as consumers should be aware of these little details, because some of these closures are more environmentally friendlier than others. Some technical corks use biodegradable material, but others are using very environmentally unfriendly glue or plastics and etc. So I think as consumers, we should be starting to take notice of packaging, of closures, of labels, of glass. Does it necessarily have to use very heavy bottle, for example? And we should ask those questions, because if globally we consume 4 billion bottles of wine a year, then these little details do matter going forward into a much more sustainable type of environment that we will all want to live in. So that's why, I think it's important to spend some time to talk about wine closure, right? So moving on, past the closure, you need something to open your bottle with. So 70% of the wine on the market are still sealed with a cork. So 开瓶器, a bottle opener, a corkscrew is definitely an essential item to have. I also want to mention another very interesting tool, a gadget. It's called a caravan. So caravan, I think, is probably one of the most interesting gadgets that's been invented in recent years. So this is invented by a MIT engineer, a space engineer, who's also happened to be a wine lover. How this works is that it doesn't actually open the bottle. You can extract any amount of wine from a closed bottle by inserting a long needle into through the foil, through the cork. You extract the wine however much you want through this needle. And as the wine comes out, an inert gas is then inserted to replace the wine. So the inert gas is argon. So 氩气 is a 惰性气, 氩气. So the inert gas fills the space of the wine that's being extracted. So this way, the remaining wine in the bottle will retain its freshness. It will still go on to age well. It wouldn't be affected by the fact that a portion of the wine has been extracted. So this is very smart. You can imagine if you're a wine lover and you're curious about how your wine is developing over the years. Now you don't have to open a whole bottle. You can just extract a glass and have a taste. Okay, at 3-year-old, your wine tastes like this, and then 5 years later, it tastes like this, etc. If you just have that one bottle, you can still observe this development of the wine, with a caravan. Another interesting thing is restaurants now can offer more wines by the glass, because the problem with selling wine by the glass is that if you open the bottle and it might become a bit stale. So if you're unlucky, you might get a glass that doesn't taste very fresh. Whereas with the caravan now, they can now ensure the wine is fresh when it's served to you. And so many restaurants are now serving more wines by the glass and more premium wines by the glass as well. So next time you go to a nice restaurant, you might notice on the wine list, they would have a caravan by the glass section. And that's a great way now for consumers to be able to taste some very, very good wines by the glass. So I think this is a wonderful gadget. The only disadvantage in my mind is that a basic model of this costs over £100. And also the argon gas will need to be replaced from time to time. But I think it's a great gift for someone who loves wine, or someone who loves wine but cannot finish a whole bottle at a time. So it's a good toy. So once you've opened the wine, then a lot of wines will benefit from being decanted. You will sometimes find when you first open a bottle of wine, it doesn't seem very expressive, it's a bit closed. The aromas have not fully opened up. And wine is a bit like a human. If you imagine yourself scooped up inside a bottle, you would want to stretch out when you come out of the bottle. So that's what decanter does to the wine. It allows the wine to stretch out and to breathe and to come to life. So most red wine could benefit from being decanted, and some white wine as well, especially oaky white wines. So in Chinese, a decanter literally says what it does, which is to wake up the wine. 醒酒器, 醒 means to wake up, right? So 醒酒器 is a container to wake up the wine. But actually, decanter has another use, which is to separate the sediments from the bottle. A lot of red wines, especially those with some bottle age, would have sediments. And don't be alarmed by sediments in wine. It's perfectly natural, and it's not to do with quality at all. So a lot of red wines would have these gritty, sandy type of sediments, and some wines would have little crystals, etc. They're all perfectly natural, but you might not want to have it in your mouth when you drink it. So by decanting, you can also filter out the sediments. But not all wine needs to be decanted. And really, if you don't have a decanter, it's not a problem. You don't need, you don't have to have a decanter in order to enjoy wine. And there are people who prefer not to decant wine because they rather wait for a while for the wine to naturally open up. And in fact, your wine glass itself, acts as a decanter as well. And that's why you see people swirl the glass to allow the wine to aerate in the glass. So by no means, decanting the wine is not a necessary step, but it does help to improve the wine a bit quicker. It helps the development to happen a little quicker. So this is really to do with how much oxygen do we need to let the wine interact and allow itself to express itself. And that is something that we will discuss later in another session. But generally speaking, if you have a younger, more robust, more flamboyant red wine, it will take a little longer to decant. And if you have an older wine, it doesn't need very long, maybe half an hour, just to let the stale smell to evaporate. And also, older wines or more delicate wines or white wines, you can use a smaller, narrower decanter with a smaller base, so not quite so much oxygen getting. Whereas for the younger, bolder wines, you might want a decanter with a flatter, rounder base with more surface area to interact, for the oxygen to interact with the wine. So it's very much like when you cut open an apple. Over time, the oxygen will oxidize the apple and turn it brown. It's kind of the same with the wine. So oxygenation is very important for wine to express itself, but too much oxygen or left out too long in the environment to react with the air, then the wine will also fade eventually as well. So oxygen needs to be managed in a way, it gives life and it also takes it away, sort of thing. So oxygen is the key here. And we will discuss later on when we talk about different varieties and different styles of wine, generally, how much aeration it needs. So this is a rather interesting photo of a traditional way of decanting, and that is to hold it against the candle. So the candle allows the sommelier to see when the sediments start to reach the neck of the bottle. But really, it's a very nice and ritualized ceremony almost. It's a very ceremonial way of decanting wine, and it's quite fun to watch. And it's still done in some restaurants. And another terminology that you might come across is double decanting. So double decanting is really just to speed up the process of letting a wine to become ready, because sometimes younger wines takes 2 hours or more, sometimes 10 hours or overnight for it to become mellow. So double decanting is a way to slightly speed it up. So you pour the wine into a decanter and then you pour it back again into the bottle. So that's what you get a lot of times in wine tastings and or professional wine competitions, or sometimes in restaurants when they want to serve you the wine a bit quicker and pour it from the bottle that you expect to see. So really decanting, as I was saying, is helpful, but it's not an essential item for the enjoyment of wine. You don't really need the caravan or the decanter. You can still have a very good time, with a good bottle. But what I think is important is the glass that you're drinking from. So the Chinese ancestors, they were very obsessed. They were obsessed about different wine vessels for different purposes. How you warm the wine, how you serve it, how you present it to the gods and ancestors. And if you are a certain rank, you must drink from a certain type of a cup. There's a lot of ritual around what sort of drinking vessels you should be using. So I think the least that we could do these days is to at least get some proper glasses, right? And a good glass will really make a difference to your enjoyment of the wine. So here I'm trying to show you that, if your wine glass look anything like, the left-hand side one or the middle one, then you're probably not doing justice to your wine. But joking aside, the wine glass on the right, I think is worth knowing, although I'm not sure it's worth having for the home environment. It's the standardized tasting glass for professionals who are taking wine education or wine exams. This is the standard tasting glass. It's very practical. The size is practical for you to have several lined in front of you, and you just pick them up and go through them. But what's important here, I want to show you, is that the shape of the glass, and why I say the wine glass on the left and the center are not very good wine glasses, and the one on the right, it serves a very specific purpose for tasting, is because you have a slightly wider bottom. So that's basically acting like a decanter, to allow more surface area for the oxygen to interact with the wine, for the aromas to evaporate through the alcohol to come up through this empty space. And that's another thing. You should never pour the glass so full. You need to leave it space for the aromas to travel up, and also for you to be able to swirl easily without spilling. You want to be able to swirl it to release the aromas. And the top of the wine glass needs to close in. It needs to close in so all the aromas are gathered when you put your nose into it. All the aromas are concentrated and gathered through this column into your nose. And also when you're drinking, it should be delivered in a more, through a more narrow rim. And so that's why, this tasting glass, the shape is much better than those ones you see on the left. And also the rim thickness. These days, modern wine glasses try to make the glass very light, very thin, especially the rim. So when you're drinking wine, you're not really aware of the glass. You don't feel like, oh, there's a chunky piece of glass in your mouth. So this modern wine glass very much want to have a round, a wide base, closed-in rim, and thin rim. So that's a good glass. And really, these days we have we are spoiled for choices in terms of glasses, right? So we have variety and style-specific glasses. And this concept is really brought about by a glass company called Riedel. Riedel really brought this concept to the consumer market by suggesting that different grapes, different style of wine would benefit from different shapes of wine glasses, because the aroma, it needs different surface areas to aerate. And also the rim will deliver the wine to different part of your tongue. So you get the optimal sensory experiences. This is actually not a gimmick. There are scientific proofs behind all of this. They've done, people have done studies, and research into how wine aroma travels based on different shapes of the glass and how it hits your palate, how it hits different parts of your tongue, and what happens, how do you perceive that experience. And I've done some Riedel glass tasting. So they're called glass tasting, not wine tasting. So they will have different glasses and they put in the same wine in different glasses, and you will have very different experiences. And there will be one glass that is obviously made for that wine. We have a phrase in Chinese called 天人合一, 天人合一 meaning heaven and human becoming one. It's a beautiful natural harmony. And this is what these glass makers are trying to achieve, which is this harmony between the wine and the glass, But of course, for the regular household, it's not very practical to have a glass for each wine or each grape. So you also have this universal wine glass. Here, I've shown the example by Zalto. So Zalto and Riedel are really the market leaders at the moment in glass making. And this you can see again, what's important is the wider base and the closed-in top. So this glass will serve perfectly well for everyday drinking. And in fact, glasses like this are better for champagne than the champagne flute. So if I can offer you a piece of tip, if you are going to invest in some wine glasses, I would rather buy some good universal wine glasses and not bother with buying champagne flutes, because champagne flutes, it's very narrow. So it's very good visually because it allows all the fizz or the bubbles to rise up continuously. So visually, the flute does a great job. But what it doesn't do is to allow enough air to interact with your champagne or with your bubbly. So you're not getting the full amount of enjoyment or the expression, especially if you're drinking really good champagne. Serving it in a flute is almost a bit of a shame because you won't get the full aromatic experience. So certainly within professional circles, people are increasingly turning into more white wine or standard wine glasses, and they are not really serving proper serious champagne flutes anymore. So as investment, I would rather buy a good universal wine glass, which would work much better for champagne as well, rather than having champagne flutes and wine glasses, etc. But of course, you don't need to buy Zalto and Riedel. They are really the market leaders. But I think what's important is that you understand what you're looking for when you're getting your glass. And another thing that's important with glasses are that you need to keep them odor free. So you don't want your glass to be smelling of your washing up liquid or the cloth that you've wiped it with, so wipe dry so you don't leave watermarks, and use a lint-free cloth. But make sure your cloth doesn't smell. And if you're putting it in the kitchen, you want to make sure it doesn't smell of your cooking. It's very important that the glass should be odorless so it doesn't interfere with your wine. And don't assume that new glasses are odorless. I've been to loads of trade tastings where they've taken out new glasses from the box and just started serving wines in them. But actually the glasses, they smell of dust or the cardboard packaging that it came in, and there's this dusty, cardboardy smell in the glass, which completely ruins the wine experience. So make sure before you serve wine, you do have a sniff that your glass is clean and looks clean, and will not interfere with your drinking experience. Okay, so that's pretty much all I want to cover today. So next time I want to talk about the different types of wine. So we'll cover, within the grape category, red wine versus white wine versus rosé, and all sorts of different things that you might start to encounter. And as I was mentioning, I think we can, if you're interested, you can scan this code to join our WeChat group. And inside the WeChat group, I think, we can have more informal discussions about any of the things that we've covered. And, you know, I've also put up some phrases that you can start asking questions like, okay, how do we say this? You know, how do you say, shall we open a bottle of wine? You know, 我们开瓶酒吧。然后呢, or how do you ask for a corkscrew in Chinese? You know, do you have a 开瓶器？你有没有开瓶器啊? Or indeed to say, I think this wine is corked. You know, how do you say that? 这瓶酒有木塞味，你要不要尝一下？你要不要试一下？ So we can in the WeChat group, you know, throw some questions around and throw some sentences around if you want to find ways to make a conversation in Chinese or in English, whatever you like. And also I will start to post some information about the next sessions, and also in the future, if we do decide to introduce some wines, I think I will do it through that group as well. But also I will post on social media as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it for today. Yeah, so let me know if you're drinking anything. Do let me know what you're drinking, and any questions you can either put it here. I don't know if Dr. Lu or Amelie want to have a little look at if there's any feedback or questions. Otherwise, we'll take it offline in the WeChat group. So, okay, cheers. Thank you very much. 干杯.
Thank you, Janet. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. That's a very interesting talk, because I have, from my point of view, I have never known so much preparing for a glass of drink.
Yeah.
Because there are terminologies not only from the language point of view, but it's actually the technique of drinking a glass of wine. So thank you. And I think because we have 106 people joining us today.
Oh,
so
wow.
If everyone has got one question,
oh,
then
gosh.
you are not going to have the time for sleep tonight. So I strongly recommend that everyone sign into our WeChat group so that we can raise a question for the coming 2 weeks before our next talk on which day is going to be 19th of July. So if you can, have your question whether this is in Chinese or in English, that will be easier for us to answer any questions. And we all try to get the right tour to have our glass of red wine or white wine or anything else.
Yeah.
So I think that's perhaps the way forward, because we still have at least 12 sessions to go in 2020 and 30 more to go in 2021. So we are hoping we have a wine club.
Yes.
Enjoy things, whether this is online or when the lockdown is finished or when we are back to normal, we can meet in person.
Yeah,
in London,
absolutely. Yes.
anywhere you think it is right. So we can do that. So we can form not only WeChat, but also WhatsApp group, because lots of other English friends, they have WhatsApp only. So it's a trial session. So well done. And thank you for all of you to join our pilot session tonight. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I truly believe you can now look at all your bottles and also the decant, everything. You are ready for an enjoyable night of a glass of wine. Thank you. 卢老师
卢老师
Yes.
没声音了。
可以吗？
有听得了，听得了。
There's a question from Julia saying, could you please show the 二维码 again? So perhaps we can 二维码 is in our posters, but perhaps Jenny, you can share the 二维码 so that people can add and join the group. Sorry, Jenny, we can't hear you. Jenny, we can't hear you. Sorry.
Okay, so don't worry about the QR code for now. You can also, we'll post it in all the WeChat groups, and I will also post it on social media, on Twitter and on Instagram, and on my LinkedIn after this. So if you follow me on Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever, or actually there's a web page, so it's called noteofmandarin.com. If you just go there, I will post the QR code on there as well. So Twitter, Instagram is @noteofmandarin, and the website is noteofmandarin.com. And also we will, between us, will post again in all the WeChat groups as well. So hopefully you will definitely get, yeah, don't worry about that. Okay?
Okay, great. So
Great,
a part of the wine talk, you can also join more public lectures and talks about Confucius Institute for Business London. That is including the talk managed by Li Jingzao in the Cambridge China Center, and also the talk that we run every week on Saturday, which is from 9 to 9:30. This is about ethnic Confucius and classic poetry. So there are many different groups that you're welcome to join us. As long as you send us the willingness, we will try to invite you to the right group. So thank you very much. And thank you for Janet, your
thank you.
and meaningful talk. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And
Thank
we
you.
look forward for the 19th of July, and perhaps the same time if we don't change it. There is a suggestion to change it for the lunchtime session from 13 to 14 during the lunchtime. But if you think you prefer this time slot, we will stick for this.
All right, okay. Yeah, we can, maybe we should ask people what they think. So please do send me some feedback after this through any means, you know, WeChat or Twitter or whatever. Please do give me some feedback in terms of format, the language, what language are you interested in, both or Chinese or English, what do you want to discuss, and also time, you know, Sunday. The reason why I thought Sunday evening is so that people are more relaxed and but I'm open to other suggestions, so please give me feedback. So I want to get to know you all a bit better in terms of what you are interested in and what is convenient for everyone. So yeah, please contact me, send me stuff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.